Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us both online in this studio. Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum continues its operation. Today it's day 398 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and I traditionally want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance. I want to introduce our speaker today. It's Fedir Venislavskyi, the People's Deputy of Ukraine, the member of Parliamentary Committee on the Security, Defense and Intelligence, and the representative of the President of Ukraine in the Parliament. Yes, I want to join you in these words, the appreciation of the work of the journalists, because we see that this information component of the Russian aggression is something that was intensified lately by Russian Federation, and we should continue countering it in the information front. Well, the Putin's arrest warrant was discussed in everywhere. So what are the further steps that we expect from International Criminal Court? What should be the further steps taken by Ukraine, and how this arrest warrant will influence the supplies of weapons by international partners to Ukraine? Well, the fact that the ICC issued the warrant for arrest of Vladimir Putin is the unprecedented step, and this step is very important from the point of view of international legal policy and the evaluation of those war crimes and barbarity committed by Russian Federation by the international community. That was all those crimes were blessed by the top-level government officials of Russian Federation, specifically Vladimir Putin. And I want to say that the warrant related to those crimes against humanity that are incriminated to Putin, the forced deportation of Ukrainian children to Russian Federation, is just a minor, however important step on the way of bringing Putin and top-level government officials and military commanders to international justice, because this case, as we're used to say now, it's the most obvious, and the evidences of such relocation are already proven, and we don't have to prove them based on those regulations being adopted in Russian Federation. Is the top-level government officials who are involved in this process, moreover, are convinced that more criminal acts, more war crimes, such as crime of aggression, to be investigated by international tribunal on which we work together in cooperation with our partners, and other war crimes to be investigated by International Criminal Court, which already stated about their active stance on the war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine at this moment. For us, first of all, what's important is the consolidation of the Western world. In this regard, we see that the official representatives of the European countries, they already state that should Putin appear in one of those countries, he will be arrested and handed over to the International Criminal Court. The Russian top-level government officials and their lawyers, they state that Russia did not ratify the Rome Statute. It's null because the International Criminal Court in this case, the Ukrainian parliament, without ratification of the Rome Statute, we allowed spreading the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court across Ukraine. So all the acts that were committed in Ukraine, they are under the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court. So from the legal vantage point, the resolution on issuance of such arrest warrant should not entail any problems in terms of its illegality. The resolution is absolutely legal and it's in full force. The Ukrainian part will take all the necessary steps which are deemed necessary by the Ukrainian government. The Prosecutor General already mentioned the conviction of Putin without his presence in Ukraine is a very important step, because even regardless this reaction by the international community And this resonating resolution, it means that Putin is currently in the status of suspect. Even if there will be a court resolution by a Ukrainian court, he will be a convict in all those cases. So it's a first step on the lengthy way of bringing all the guilty ones to justice. You touched a very important subject of Rome Statute. This subject started to be discussed in view of this arrest order. Among our lawyers who mentioned the necessity to ratify Rome Statute, are there any movements in this regard? Well, the process is underway, but I want to say that during this process, on the way of ratification of the Rome Statute by Ukraine, there are many certain myths being produced by some political forces, by some lawyers, to make such ratification impossible for the time being. What I'm talking about is that one of the most popular myth is that should Ukraine ratify Rome Statute, all the servicemen who fulfill their duties in the territory of Ukraine, in case the shell flies in the wrong direction, they fall under the jurisdiction of ICC. So again, the Verkhovna Rada recently amended the criminal code, which regulates all the institutions of the International Criminal Court in Ukraine. That there is full-fledged cooperation between Ukrainian law enforcement agencies and International Criminal Court, and the experts of ICC from the very first days of the full-scale aggression, they keep documenting, and the prosecutors keep documenting the crimes committed by the Russian occupational army. So this legislation is already in effect. In fact, if we go back to the ground, the Ukrainian party already created legal prerequisites for the ICC to fulfill their functions in Ukraine. Ratification is on the way, we're working on it, but we have to relieve this tension in the society, the ambiguous interpretation of the Rome Statute in Ukrainian society. We will ratify it shortly. Well, there is already a resolution taken by ICC. Everybody considers it with favor. So our task as Ukraine is to have the tribunal happen. So how are things in that area? The tribunal, yes, the international tribunal, as I mentioned, it's a separate case. It will be created. I think that there is no doubt, even in our foreign partners. Now there is discussion about the format of such court. It should be an ad hoc court. So the tribunal created for investigation of specific crime of unprovoked aggression waged by Russian Federation in 2014 and expanded in 2022. So there are two main models considered. The ideal model from the point of view of acceptance by the international community is creation of the tribunal under the mandate of United Nations. Now we have a problem here. Russia is the permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, and that was a right vested in themselves by themselves, actually, because it's the Soviet Union which is mentioned in the Statute of the United Nations. However, there is no single stance, a joint stance on the illegitimacy of Russia's participation in the Security Council of the United Nations. So we have to be conscious that Russia will use their right of veto to veto any resolution of the Security Council of the United Nations. And meanwhile, Russia is still there. We should not await the approval of the creation of this international tribunal. And in that case, the General Assembly of the United Nations, they cannot be vetoed by Russia, and all the resolutions that were approved by them, they evidence that we have about 150 countries are allies, so we will do everything possible to have the General Assembly of the United Nations vote for the creation of such tribunal, and if we see any counteraction on the side of our partners who already expressed themselves as ready to create such court, there's yet another, we will work with them and we will cooperate maybe to create another such tribunal based on the agreement of the allied countries. On the 25th of March, the president of aggressor country Putin stated that there will be the tactical nuclear weapons located in Belarus. Ukraine stated about the emergency meeting of the Security Council of the United Nations. What should be our reaction? Well, the reaction should be in compliance with international law. Russia, by its statement on the hypothetical location of the nuclear tactical weapons in Belarus, violates all the international agreements about non-dissemination of nuclear arms, because it's a specific obligation not to place nuclear arms in the territory of the third country. Russia neglects for an umpteenth time with the international regulations. So once again, we apply to the General Assembly. I think we will cover this issue in more detail to draw the attention of international community. It's also important because regardless of all the ambiguity of Budapest memorandum that we discussed a lot of times, and the fact that it's ignored by all the signatories, Russian Federation, again, I want to remind you that when they started the war and the discussions about Budapest memorandum started, they said that they don't threat with nuclear arms. There is no such threat to Ukraine. So in fact, in the development of this conflict waged by Russia against Ukraine, they plan to locate these nuclear arms in Belarus. This is the violation of this Budapest memorandum. So I think that the reaction of the West will be powerful, but I don't think that this step, even if it's implemented, regardless all the contraction by the civilized world, I don't think it will influence the situation in the front lines. Do we expect any specific resolution from the Security Council of the United Nations? Well, we shouldn't rely on the resolution of the Security Council, because Russia will block it using its right of veto, but we will draw everybody's attention to it. Our diplomats will work on that. I think that this matter will be discussed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Dear colleagues, if we have any questions on the floor, please let me know, get involved in our conversation. And I want to ask about another law that was adopted recently. The government, the Parliament supported the citizenship upon the adoption of citizenship upon the examination in national history and Ukrainian language. So what do we expect upon the implementation of this law? This is the law that we adopted last week, and it will take effect shortly. I can tell you, not as a people's deputy, but as to the constitutional law expert, this law is 32 years late. When we first adopted the law on citizenship, one of the conditions for the foreigner to get the Ukrainian citizenship was mastering of Ukrainian language on a level which is normal for normal conversation. But that law did not contemplate what should be the organizations which define which identify the level of Ukrainian language to make it sufficient for normal conversation, for example. So we adopted this law last week. We regulated the issues that were out, where we had some legal gaps in this issue of adoption of Ukrainian citizenship. So now we worded quite strictly that the level of Ukrainian language will be identified by the Commission, which defines these standards, and the procedure for the examination will be defined by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine with no ambiguous wordings. They will stipulate who and where will make examination, who will identify the level of Ukrainian language. It will be spread for all the categories of foreign citizens who want to adopt Ukrainian citizenship. The only exception will be for the foreigners who are of interest to the government of Ukraine and those who have merits in front of Ukraine, for example, who are currently in the ranks of the Ukrainian army for the time being. They will have two years term within which they will have to master the history and language and Ukrainian constitution and then pass all the necessary exams. We just formalized the procedure and we worded it in more detail. We identified the criteria for mastering Ukrainian language. After the law takes effect, the Cabinet of Ministers will take all the necessary steps for implementation of this law. Will have clear algorithm, clear procedure for the persons who want to adopt the Ukrainian citizenship. Another interesting draft law that was supported recently is about decolonization of toponymics. You were one of the co-authors of that legislation, so tell us more about that draft law. Yes, I was one of the co-developers of that draft law. The one that was adopted in the first reading last year is different from what we adopted on the 20th of March, on Monday, as a result of a very diligent work by people's deputies who are part of the Committee on State Building and Municipal Reconstruction. It acquired a complex manner, and it provided a clear glossary of what is colonial policy, who cannot be commemorated in those toponymical names. So the essence of this law is quite simple. You may find the explanation in the explanatory notice to this draft law. So the draft law was taken 1.5 pages, and the explanatory note was taken 30 more pages. Now, even regardless of the full-scale invasion, this aggressive war that resulted in death of tens of thousands of people, we still have some Moscow Avenue, Moscow Street, Tyumen Street, Saratov Street, and other toponymics. So we have a lot of names in our toponymics that either commemorate or glorify or otherwise demonstrate the ties between Ukraine and Russia since century 16, 17, and then Soviet Union, Russian Empire. Well, their ideology is not different. They did everything that they can to demonstrate that we don't have a right to our own national identity. They were doing everything they could, and even in the words of top-level government officials of Russian Federation, it sounds now that Ukraine is a piece of Russia that got split somehow. So it's the absurd that cannot be confirmed with any historic documents. So for the time being, we have the law to have the local governments to revise all the names related to Russian Federation, and according to the procedure approved by the legislation, they will have to change all the names that glorify some Soviet or Russian Empire era leaders who acted aggressively towards Ukraine, who defied Ukrainian right to exist. And when we were adopting that law in the first reading, we started a systemic process in different regions of Ukraine when the local governments started renaming. Well, they were understanding that the law would be coming shortly. They started renaming the streets and squares. So within a couple of years, I think there will be no reminders of Russia in Ukraine. Reminders of Russia who created these crimes, who committed these crimes against Ukraine. Well, thank you for this law. Finally, we get rid of all those Moscow streets and Moscow squares. It will be another instrument for the representatives of our local governments. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for this interesting conversation. Dear colleagues, I'm reminding you, joining us was Fedir Venislavskyi, and our next briefing is at 1 o'clock. Joining us will be Alexander Markushin, Mayor of Irpin, and we will be talking about the 1 year of reconstruction of Irpin after the occupation. So bear with us, trust in the armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.